Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started now. We had originally 70 participants registered, and it looks like 67 are on. So we're going to get ready to go. First, I'm going to share the results of the poll. And it looks like pretty much as we expected. What's interesting is half of you have never attended a built environment workshop. So thank you for attending this time. And it also looks like this day and time was good for everyone. Most people would prefer a weekday, and they would like to have another one in the spring. And it looks like overwhelmingly the next topic preferred is on historic buildings and landscapes in New Mexico. So thank you for taking that poll. My name is Michelle N.Z., and I'm the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer and State Archaeologist with the Historic Preservation Division. I will be this meeting's host. Carla McWilliams, a historian with the HPD, is the co-host. Please note that this webinar is being recorded. Since this workshop is being held in a webinar format, all participants are muted and videos are off. This is to minimize noise and distraction. Please use the chat function. If you have questions for me or Carla, the chat may be found at the bottom ribbon of the Zoom screen. This will open a new window, and you can send a private meeting to us, a private chat to us, or to other meeting participants. This morning's webinar will have 2 presentations with a short break in between. After each presentation, we'll have a question and answer session. If you have a question during the presentation, please use the Q&A button to type it in. You may also use the raise hand function at the end of the presentation to alert us that you have a question. We will request that you unmute yourself, and then you will be able to ask the question. We will try to answer as many questions as possible, but if we don't answer your question or you think of others after the workshop, please email me, Stephen Mofson, or Lynette Polari. I will now let our State Historic Preservation Officer, Dr. Jeff Pappas, give a brief introduction.
Very good. Excellent. And thanks, Michelle. And thanks to everyone for attending this morning's workshop. We really do enjoy putting these together. We love to partner with NMAC to put on what we hope will be a useful presentation for you around the concept and ideas of historic integrity. And as you know, historic integrity constitutes a very big part of the way in which we evaluate significance in historic properties, historic landscapes, archaeological sites. And the concept, or at least the idea of integrity, was sort of batted around with the staff several months ago. And what we like to do is to offer up, let's say, concepts, ideas around the National Register process that we don't talk about regularly, but of course is very much involved in the work that we do. And so I hope you enjoy today's conversation. With that, we have 2 presentations to illustrate our thinking and the way in which we look at the National Register standards around the issue of integrity. And the 2 presentations today will be presented by, at least the first one will be presented by Stephen Mofson. It will be a primer. It will sort of be a meat and potatoes version of the way the standards and the National Register guidance and bulletins thinks about integrity. Stephen will take you through a slide presentation in various cases to illustrate the notion of integrity and how it's expressed in the standards. We'll follow that with a brief break, about a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back with a second presentation from Lynette Pillare. And as you know, I think most of you know that Lynette is HPD's historic architect. And prior to her joining the staff, about 2.5 years ago, she had done a lot of work with the Navajo Nation to do some rehab work and some new construction at the Navajo Preparatory School. And so she's going to use that case study as an example to talk about integrity in the way that she thinks about it in her work. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for attending. It's great to see, I mean, I'm looking at names and a lot of wonderful and familiar names. I hope that you're all doing well during this time of COVID. And I see a lot of new names, which Michelle, and I'll just repeat what Michelle had said. I want to thank you very much for participating in this workshop. I also would like to thank the staff of NMAC for working with HPD to put this on, and particularly the staff at HPD, who is mainly responsible for organizing today's gathering. That would be Michelle, of course, as the host, and Carla McWilliams as the co-host, who's an historian at HPD, Stephen Mofson, who's the State and National Register Coordinator, Lynette Pillare, and Bob Estes as well, too, who had participated as a liaison between HPD and NMAC to put this on. And we're really hoping to put on more of these as we go through the spring and into the summer. So with that, I'd like to welcome you again, and I hope you have a very good experience, and good luck with your work. And with that, I would like to introduce Stephen Mofson. Stephen, take it away with your first presentation. Stephen, I think you're still muted.
So this is gonna just take me a second to get everything kind of situated and properly formatted. Okay, getting close. There we are. And let's see if I can get okay, so I'm not muted, so you all can hear me. And okay, so this morning we're going to discuss historic integrity. But before I begin, I want to briefly introduce myself. My name is Stephen Mofson, and I have written National Register nominations for the National Park Service and for 3 state historic preservation offices, including my current job as State and National Register Coordinator for New Mexico. My first nomination was for a roadside tavern in central Delaware, and my most unusual nomination was for a World War II era biplane. I have prepared over 200 nominations that are listed in the National Register of Historic Places. Historic integrity is one measure in the way we evaluate properties for listing in the National Register. And sometimes it's easy to dismiss a property that looks like it's been altered. Its flaws may be plainly visible, but it's hard to interpret them if you don't know why a property may be eligible in the first place. So we're going to do 3 things today. First, we're going to discuss how historic integrity fits into the National Register evaluation process. Then we're going to go over each of the 7 aspects of integrity. And then we will end with some unusual and challenging applications of integrity. The 3 measures of 3 measures or tests for a property to be eligible include the National Register criteria. First, a property must meet at least one criteria to be eligible. Second, a property must be 50 years of age to be eligible for listing. And three, a property must maintain historic integrity. Sorting out the age of a property is easy because it's factual. Historic integrity is challenging because it requires knowledge of the property and some level of interpretation. The National Park Service has published 26 National Register bulletins that are posted on their website to offer guidance to applicants in all areas of architecture and history. They do not have a bulletin on historic integrity. In fact, the National Register explanation of historic integrity appears only on 2 pages in Bulletin 15 on how to apply the National Register criteria. The definition of integrity reads, the authenticity of a property's historic identity, evidenced by the survival of physical characteristics that existed during the property's historic or prehistoric period. So to put this into practice, you need to know 3 important pieces of information. 1, what is the property's historic identity? 2, what physical characteristics define that identity? And 3, do these characteristics still exist? So the first step in evaluating historic integrity is understanding what criteria may apply and what are the character defining features that convey significance. Do these features survive or are they missing? If a property may be significant because it's an excellent example of a Pueblo Revival style house, does the house retain the architectural features that define the Pueblo Revival style? The measure of historic integrity, and I would add here that the National Register just refers to integrity as integrity. I refer to it as historic integrity because when you're talking to property owners and you tell them that their house lacks integrity, they can, on the one hand, get offended, and on the other hand, they just may be confused. So I would say historic integrity or physical integrity might be one way to work around that bit of confusion. So here are the 7 aspects of integrity. It is essential to understand these aspects of integrity in order to evaluate National Register eligibility. What is not so well known is that these aspects are listed roughly in order of importance, so that location is first. The National Register of Historic Places is not named by accident. Identifying and preserving historic places is paramount. So let's look at each of the 7 aspects of integrity. Location is the quality of integrity retained by a historic property existing in the same place as it did during the period of significance. Period of significance describes the time period when a property achieved its importance. Historic resources have meaning when they are associated with their historic communities. It's also why the National Register lists geography, points of latitude and longitude, rather than just listing buildings and structures. It's also why moved buildings are not eligible for listing in the National Register. When you move a building, you remove it from its historic associations. Design, the second aspect of integrity, is the quality of integrity applying to the elements that create the physical form, plan, space, structure, and style of a property. Here, in this house in Las Vegas, important features of its design include that it's 2 stories, that it has a side hall plan, both unusual in New Mexico, and its Greek Revival style or territorial entrance and window hoods. The character-defining features of this modern building in Clovis include its circular plan, emphasis on reinforced concrete, and fenestration so that it appears as a modern Greek temple. So can you see here in the non-historic alteration to this building that might diminish its historic design? The upper two floors were added after the building was first constructed, and they significantly diminish the historic design of the building. Here, a balcony was added to a historic commercial building. Even though it's less egregious than the previous example, the additions obscure enough of the historic facade that its design is significantly diminished. Setting is the quality of integrity applying to the physical environment of a historic property. Some properties have settings that are designed and integral to a property. County courthouses, for example, are often located on a high point of land in the center of town and surrounded by a landscape plaza with ornaments such as fountains and monuments. Similarly, churches in New Mexico are surrounded by precinct walls that define the immediate setting, and they're often located in the center of communities. And a more expansive view of setting may include the historic plaza and the narrow agricultural valley in which the church is located, because this larger setting tells an important story about the central role of the church in a traditional Hispano village in northern New Mexico. This bank in southern Illinois was once located on a busy commercial street in the center of town. Since its construction, the entire town, its setting, has been lost. Materials are the quality of integrity applying to the physical elements that were combined or deposited in a particular pattern or configuration to form a historic property. Adobe construction is essential to the architecture of New Mexico. For centuries, adobe blocks were laid in courses with mud mortar to form a wall. The wall was then plastered with mud annually to protect from sun and rain. Since World War II, many historic adobe buildings have been covered with stucco, which diminishes the aspect of historic material, but in itself does not disqualify a building from eligibility. Similarly, aluminum and vinyl siding and asphalt shingle roofs are modern materials that approximate the appearance of historic materials and are generally considered neutral and do not disqualify a building from consideration for National Register listing. Here you'd ask, is the corrugated facade original, or is it a later addition that obscures a historic facade? If historic materials are present but are obscured so that they are not visible, they do not count toward the aspect of materials. Elements of design, material, and workmanship must be visible in order to count. Here, the pressed metal facade is a rare building material that conveys the building's significance for architecture, but also its association with the railroad. The only means by which such a building materials were brought into the state during the late territorial period was via the railroad. Workmanship is the quality of integrity applying to the physical evidence of the crafts of a particular culture, people, or artisan. Here, a resident of Pie Town in the 1940s builds a fence with cheap slabs of wood cut with a circular saw, which you can identify by the curved kerfs on the wood. And then the fence is strung together with wire. All of this indicates workmanship or craftsmanship. This historic brick wall was repointed with Portland cement, which damaged the brick, and it also was repointed with flush joints and not the historic deep struck joints. This loss of craft diminishes the historic integrity of the building. Workmanship is not only visible on older historic properties, but also in the way modern buildings are constructed. Feeling is the quality through which a historic property evokes the aesthetic or historic sense of a past time and place. This street of small houses evokes the feeling of the 1940s, when small houses were popular. And because these houses maintain their historic design and materials, this sense of the 1940s is conveyed. And it's also emphasized by their close spacing on small lots. The Union Drive-In in Las Vegas retains the aspect of feeling because of its setting on the Eastern Plains and its historic screen and its parking plan, all of which evoke the mid-20th century when drive-ins were popular. Association is the link of a historic event, activity, or person. Also, the quality of integrity through which a historic property is linked to a particular past time and place. Here, the corral and grazing lands make an explicit link to Navajo agricultural practices. This grocery store, through its design, materials, and location on Central Avenue, makes a clear association with mid to late 20th century patterns of commerce before big box stores became dominant. So now that we understand the 7 aspects of integrity, we can begin to apply them. And these are the 4 basic steps. The first is establish significance. The second, define essential features. 3, are the essential features visible? And 4, which aspects of integrity are vital? Why might this house be eligible? What are its essential features, and are they visible? This center hall plan house relies on symmetry to convey its significance. The symmetry is seen in the fenestration, the doors and windows across the main facade. The symmetry is seen in the central gable and the chimneys. These features are visible and they are most vital in order to evaluate this house in the area of architecture. And remember that to be eligible, or rather to be individually eligible for listing in the National Register, the interior must also retain historic integrity. So here we see a center hall plan house that's intact, and it includes Greek Revival style cornice and door and window surrounds. Mid-20th century houses are evaluated the same way. This ranch house retains a high level of historic integrity because its design, materials, and workmanship remain intact. And the historic plan of the ranch house maintains its historic design with a large bay window and rooms that flow into one another through a large cased opening. For architectural surveys, most determinations are evaluated under criterion C, only for architecture, and these evaluations are made from the exterior. The interior is treated neutrally because we don't know very much about the interior when looking at buildings from the street. So these interiors really don't add or detract from the evaluation. The exterior must have historic integrity of design, materials, and workmanship. Or put another way, would the original property owner recognize this building if he were to come back? And in this case, I would say yes. Condition should not be confused with historic integrity. Buildings can be in poor condition and still maintain a high degree of historic integrity. This church in Thailand appears neglected, but it also retains sufficient design, materials, and workmanship to be eligible for listing. If you look at it, what is missing on the exterior? Really not much more than doors and windows. The interior appears forlorn, but it retains enough historic integrity to convey its significance as a small rural church. This church retains its small scale, front-facing gable and tower, and these are all important characteristics of African-American churches in the South. It has lost significant portions of weatherboard cladding, and it has significant structural problems. As you can see, the building is racked and held up by these series of cables. The church is undoubtedly in poor condition, but it was listed in the National Register of Historic Places in the condition you see here, because it retains its character-defining features. That is, a visitor can see the original design and understand how this building functioned as a church. Here you have a building that may not be significant in the area of architecture, but it also doesn't take a lot of imagination to see its potential eligibility under criterion A in the area of entertainment recreation because of its association with early broadcasting in New Mexico. Buildings, as we have seen, are not static objects, and they do change over time. And sometimes these changes can have inherent significance. So here we see an early 20th century commercial building with a new glazed tile storefront that was added to the first floor in the 1950s. The new storefront is significant because it's an excellent example of mid-20th century modernism. This building was built in downtown Albuquerque in the 1920s. It's architecturally significant because the modern facade that was added in the mid-20th century is an excellent example of modernism, and it reflects a desire among many to redesign existing storefronts to reflect the popular tastes in architecture that was modernism. This is a trickier case. So here, the two streamlined modern floors added to the top of this building are good examples of early modernism. The problem is that the modern floors, or their construction, resulted in the loss of the historic roof line of the original high Victorian Gothic office block below. The loss of the roof line, the lost roof line would have been very picturesque according to the style of high Victorian Gothic. It would have been crowned with towers and spires and such. And so the loss of this major character defining feature has diminished this building's architectural significance so that it's really no longer a good example of any style. So altered buildings can have their own inherent significance, or they can just create a mismatch where nothing is significant. Mills, such as flour mills, are important building types on the Eastern Plains. Here, the additions dwarf the original three-story central building in the center, but they are essential to understand how this mill operated in the early 20th century. That is, each new section either provided storage or new technology. In this domestic example, you can see that the main facade has been rebuilt, but the bungalow roof line and the brackets still remain. And so this is sort of an example where it's often difficult to know exactly what occurred to a building when it's been plastered with stucco, because these stucco coverings often hide a lot of clues to the history of the building. Well, how about this house? Here, the only change in design is really the modernistic garage door. The modern design and modern materials of the garage are distracting, but it's not enough to significantly diminish the integrity of the house. In this example, a two-story commercial building is intact except for the storefront. It's rare that historic storefronts survive, and the eligibility of a building usually does not rest on their presence. This commercial building is eligible because even without the storefront, the rest of the building conveys its significance as a downtown commercial building. Storefronts can be likened to porches. Porches are often exposed to the weather, and they often don't survive. And storefronts often get changed out and made more modern in keeping with the times. This was a Navajo trading post in northwest Rio Arriba County. So the problem here is not the missing windows and doors or that it's been abandoned. The problem is that it doesn't have a roof. None or few buildings can be eligible as buildings without a roof. The National Register considers these properties as archaeological sites rather than buildings. Historic districts comprise historic properties, but they are evaluated by a completely different method. The definition of a historic district is a significant concentration, linkage, or continuity of sites, buildings, structures, or objects united historically or aesthetically by plan or physical development. Well, what is a significant concentration? A significant concentration has always been an elusive concept, and the answer is different for every historic district. Ranch house suburbs, for example, should be densely populated by houses, one next to another. But say Trinity site, where the first atomic bomb was tested, includes a significant concentration of resources. The resources are just fewer because they're based on those that were present at the time of the detonation. A few years ago, the Historic Preservation Division published guidance on identity and evaluation of historic districts. And I just want to point out that this is a 6-page document, and it's available on our website, and it gives a lot of important information about how to identify and evaluate historic districts. Farms and ranches are often evaluated as historic districts because they have significant concentrations of resources related by theme And so those are historic districts. Downtowns or commercial districts are a common type of historic district. Residential historic districts are another common type of historic districts. They not only include houses, but also the street plan, the uniform setbacks from the street, cement curbs and plantings. All of these resources must be determined contributing or non-contributing. Historic districts are binary because they are composed of only two types of resources, contributing and non-contributing. In this definition, the key word here is adding. A property can add actually very little, but still add to the significance of a historic district. This hotel in downtown Carrizozo contributes to the historic district because it retains historic integrity of design, materials, and workmanship. The first floor storefronts have been altered, but this does not diminish our understanding of the hotel's historic appearance. This is another storefront with all or most of the storefront either missing or covered. And here you would ask, well, does it contribute? Yes, it does, because storefronts, as I had mentioned earlier, are temporal features. They seldom survive. Commercial buildings are evaluated on the parapet across the top and the frame on both sides. We have not talked about side elevations or interiors in buildings in historic districts because its contributing or non-contributing status is based only on the main facade. This center hall plan house is surrounded by a historic colonnade, which has been infilled with non-historic concrete block. Mostly, this is an aesthetic conundrum. It may look awful, and our first impulse may be to say that it's non-contributing, but in fact, only 3 bays of the porch have been filled, and bays themselves, even those are still visible. This house absolutely contributes to its historic district. Similarly, our first impulse here might be to say that this school is non-contributing because its physical condition is so poor. The site has been trashed, and there is not one pane of glass that survives. But glass can be replaced. What's important is that the metal frames survive, along with the other qualities that make this an excellent example of a modern international style school in rural Georgia. And this school was listed in the National Register in the condition that you see it here. What about the building in the center of this slide? It appears very plain, but the intact storefront, if you look carefully, has very high aluminum display cases that indicate that this was a mid-20th century jewelry store. Jewelry storefronts were often made smaller because the jewelry is small. So they would often elevate them and make their storefronts more concentrated on their wares. The building facade is, let's see, partially seen to the left. The brick building to the left is entirely new. The fenestration, the running bond brickwork, and the exaggerated cornice are giveaways that this building is non-contributing. And in fact, just you would really never see an arrangement with tall windows and a narrow door. And that's not a common plan facade that you would see in a downtown historic district. Would this store from the 1950s contribute to a commercial or industrial historic district? Well, here the problem is that most of the building has been covered with a non-historic screen of masonry panels. So likewise, the building cannot contribute if it cannot be seen. Similarly, a building hidden behind a wall does not contribute to a historic district because it cannot be seen. This may seem extreme, but how does a building contribute if nobody sees it? I want to finish with a couple examples that may have that you may not have had experience with or maybe found vexing. A traditional cultural property, or TCP, is a type of resource that can be applied to any category of property type, especially historic districts. Traditional cultural properties are unique because they must be connected with living communities so that the period of significance will often end at the present. Resources that may seem not important because they appear contemporary may be eligible in a traditional cultural property. New Mexico has numerous TCPs, many associated with Native American groups. The Tortugas Pueblo near New Mexico State University, near Las Cruces, is a TCP because the Pueblo peoples here have been celebrating a festival of Our Lady of Guadalupe every December in the same way for more than 100 years. This includes religious services and dances and traditional communal feasts, and a 4-mile procession to the summit of a mountain, which rises above the NMSU campus. The contributing resource in this image is the unpaved parking lot, where pilgrims gather to say prayers before the beginning of the march. The entire route of the procession and a mountain are eligible for listing in the National Register. Most of this may not be known to a recorder who is filling out survey forms. So, and you wouldn't know this. So it's really important to talk to local residents. Talking to residents, we all understand takes time, but sometimes the payoff can be really big. For example, local contacts might explain that this area beneath an interstate underpass is part of the pilgrimage route, and it's historic, but otherwise that might not be obvious. Faculty and students at NMSU may walk across the street and never realize that it's part of a traditional pilgrimage route used by religious pilgrims once a year. Another challenge is evaluating the integrity of movable structures, such as locomotives, rolling stock, ships, and airplanes. How do they fit into the National Register of Historic Places? This is not a trick question. Hundreds of structures such as these are listed in the National Register. To be eligible, and this is the key, these structures must reside in a historically appropriate setting. Not necessarily the exact historic setting connected with the structure, but an appropriate one. So for a small aircraft, the appropriate setting is an aircraft hangar. Setting is important because the National Register does not list museum objects because they are not connected with historic places. So a locomotive would need to have a home in a rail yard, and ships must be located at a dock or marina. Secondly, most of the aircraft in this case must remain intact. Engines can be rebuilt and tires replaced, but much of the structure of the plane and its skin of sheet metal should survive to demonstrate design, materials, and workmanship. The 7 aspects of integrity apply to other structures, such as dams and bridges. Acequias or irrigation ditches require seasonal maintenance, which can include building up the banks of soil from the stream bed. This practice does not diminish the integrity because it's a traditional community practice. Sites can also include battlefields and parks. Historic landscapes can be challenging to evaluate because they quickly change over time as vegetation dies and is replaced with new plantings. Historic integrity is retained when the overall plan of plantings and open space is preserved, and when new plants are either identical or replicate the historic plants. Cemeteries convey early settlement practices in their overall plan and in the grave markers through design, materials, and workmanship. Grave markers like statues or murals are objects that can be eligible under criteria A and C if they retain historic integrity. So historic integrity then is the authenticity of a property, and it's one measure of eligibility for listing in the National Register. It can be applied after one knows why a property may be eligible in the first place. A Spanish mission church and a suburban ranch house will have different character-defining features. Understanding what these features are and how vital they are is essential to applying the 7 aspects of integrity. And so with that, I would ask, are there any questions that I can answer?
Stephen, we had a couple questions, one of which was answered as you continued your presentation. The one outstanding question that we have comes from, looks like it comes from Carrie Gregory.
Okay.
And she says, I have struggled with association. Can you provide an example of a property that does not retain integrity of association?
Association is would be an association with a specific event or other historic, phenomenon. Where feeling and association have always been kind of squishy in terms of understanding, their meaning and the difference between them. But you remember, feeling is connected to a general sense of a time period. Association is a specific connection with a resource. So a historic, say, a battlefield that's been paved over as a parking lot would no longer maintain its historic association, as well as other aspects of integrity.
Thank you very much. So let's see, we did just have someone say, Mr. Ronald Fields said, I love that a lot of New Mexico sites are in this. And I said that Stephen finds the best images. So if there's any other questions, you can feel free to put them in the Q&A, or you can raise your hand using the raise hand function and we can unmute you to ask a more specific question. Just give a minute here to see if there's any further questions. Oop, looks like we do have a couple questions, Stephen.
Okay.
So we have Philip Esser asking, the World War II Sierra Chapel at White Sands Missile Range was moved for the former Camp Luna, New Mexico. It has historic significance. Can it be eligible?
Well, hi, Phil. Moved buildings are categorically not eligible for the National Register unless they meet a specific consideration. And the consideration is that the building must be significant for architecture, because it can't be, once it's been moved, there are no other criteria that are going to apply because it's been removed from all of those historic associations. So, I mean, I'm not familiar with this specific building, but in a general sense, a building can be moved and still be eligible, but it has to meet, I can't remember what criteria consideration it is, but that is possible, that it could be eligible.
Thank you, Stephen.
One more thing on that, though, is that also it's the setting has to be compatible with its original setting. If it was a rural church or a military installation or something, its new location should either be like a rural church or in a military installation.
Great,
That's
thank you. We've had a few more questions come in. So let's see here. We have Maria Johnson asks, if someone has a historic cultural property that they want evaluated and registered, how does one do this, even if it is not associated with any particular cultural resource property project?
That's a good question. On our website, under registers of cultural properties, we have a form it's called the preliminary questionnaire, and that's the place to start. You submit this relatively brief questionnaire, and then I would look at it, and if it appears the property may be eligible, then we would follow up with more information. But it's rather than filling out the entire National Register registration form, this is kind of an early, quick way to provide our office with a sense that the building may or may not be eligible.
Great, thank you. Let's see here. Adam Sullins asks, how important is historic integrity to the evaluation of archaeological sites?
Yeah, I'm not an archaeologist. I didn't get into it because archaeology sites are a whole nother kind of area. But all the aspects of integrity apply, and it is absolutely important that our archaeological sites maintain historic integrity. One of the things that's really interesting or people don't realize is that excavating an archaeological site often makes it not eligible for the National Register, because you're excavating all the objects and things that may explain why it's important, and you've got nothing then left at the site to sort of tell that story. So that's just an interesting thing, but generally speaking, it must maintain aspects of integrity.
Thank you. Let's see here. From Jennifer Frederick, can you elaborate on when interiors are necessary for eligibility and when they are neutral?
Yeah, I had mentioned them being neutral when architectural surveys are being conducted, because they're always conducted from the street, and generally recorders don't know a lot of the history of the building, and they don't have access to the interior. But that's just for survey work. If you want to list a property in the National Register that's not part of a historic district, the interior plan and materials workmanship must be relatively intact. If you're in a historic district, then really the only evaluation is made from the main facade, and that's, you don't need really any interior that remaining intact.
All right, so we have a couple more questions, but because of time, I think we're going to take this last question from Lynn Neal. What about if a moved building is strongly associated with a person of significance?
Yeah, that's a great question. The problem is that when you move the building, you're removing it from a place where that person achieved their significance in whatever area. And so, this is why the National Register, will really only allow you to nominate a moved building for architecture, because that remains apparent. But moving a building, you lose all of the historic associations, including associations with important persons.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm going to turn this back over to Michelle.
Thank you, Carla. Why don't we answer Martin Dupich's question,
Okay.
and then we can respond to the other two via the answer.
We'll respond to the
function.
outstanding Q&A questions via the Q&A answer function. But we do have a second presentation this morning and a little bit of a break. But Martin Stupich's question is, are there advantages or disadvantages to having a property on the register?
Yes, there are advantages. There are no disadvantages. When I would go into communities and say this is an all carrots but no stick program, no one would believe me. But in fact, because the National Register does not place any restrictions on what private property owners do with their property, there's really no downside. Now, the positive reasons to list would be to better understand, through the process of writing a nomination, you better understand your property, you become a better steward of the property. And also, there's a very real, tangible benefit in the way of tax credits, which are both a federal tax credit and a state tax credit for preservation work that's done to historic buildings that are listed in the state register and also the National Register.
Thank you, Stephen. Michelle?
Okay, thank you. Yes. So we're going to take our 10-minute break now, and Lynette is going to put up her PowerPoint as we get started with our break, but we will get started again at 10:45.
Carla, is the PDF up and looking good?
Yes, ma'am. Do you want to try to page through
Thank you.
and we can make sure it works?
I will do that.
Great.
How's it looking?
Looks good.
Thank you. Great.
Good. We're all ready for you to start.
Good. All right.
My goodness.
Carla,
Yes, Lynette.
housekeeping. I just had a symbol for unstable. I'm wondering if I should stop my video.
Yes, if you've had that symbol, if you stop the video, that would help your bandwidth. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to,
Now we just lost your presentation.
I know it's coming back up.
Okay, just making sure.
Is it back?
It is back.
Very good.
Carla?
Stephen.
Yeah. Do you want me to hit send when I complete these? Send
Um,
privately? I don't know.
Hold on one moment. Stephen, it looks like Michelle tackled some of the questions, and if you have further comments, they should be under the answered, and you can add additional information on the questions there.
Okay, I mean, there were only
Yes, correct.
there were only two questions, or here's three.
Yeah, I answered them.
Oh,
Yeah, Michelle just answered.
The two from earlier, I don't know about the new one.
okay. Do you want me to hit send? Like, I mean, in other words, what do I do with?
So you should be able to type, there's a type answer button, and you can click on that and then just hit enter, I believe, and that will add your comments to the questions in the Q&A.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, I have that at 10:45, so let's get started with the next presentation from Dr. Polari.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lynette Polari, and I'm the historic architect for the division. As Jeff said, I've been with HPD now for 2.5 years, but I have over 40 years of experience as a registered architect and planner. Before coming to New Mexico in 2017, I practiced architecture and planning with my partner, Stephen Thompson, for 20 years out of the Phoenix area. But I'm very happy to be here today to talk with you about a project that my firm with Stephen worked on for over 15 years. A project that frankly gave me my grounding in historic preservation work, but also a strong grounding in seeking integrity in buildings from the past, but also seeking integrity in the design of buildings for the future. So the project I will speak to you today about is Navajo Preparatory Schools campus in Farmington, New Mexico. And I'm now going to shut off my video so that we have adequate bandwidth for all these images. My firm worked on the campus development project for 13 years, spanning from 1997, when we started master planning, up to 2010, when the final building, the Betty O.J. Student Center, was completed and earned a LEED Gold rating, which was the first for the BIA under the Schools Development Program. I'll be talking today about 4 primary phases of work we did for this campus and school. Master planning first, then into a phase 1 dormitory project. New construction on a historic campus. Then the phase 2 historic project we'll go into in detail. And then finally, the phase 3 project, which had several different buildings and site development elements to it. So this is an image of Navajo Preparatory Schools campus in Farmington, New Mexico in 1933. My firm started work on this, as I said, in 1997 when we won the master planning project with the design workshop out of Tempe, Arizona. And during the planning phase, we worked on the master plan for the historic 83-acre campus, design guidelines for all future buildings, educational specs, and the infrastructure report. We successfully planned and delivered 3 phases of campus development across 13 years, worth $50 million in capital monies. This image, I think, is wonderful. I love it. It shows the school as it was in 1933. It was founded here, though, in 1912 after the original site in Hogback was destroyed by a catastrophic flood. The land is owned by the Navajo Nation in trust, and the buildings are owned by the school. This image shows what we call the original foundation period buildings, i.e. period of significance. And the first building, McDonald's Hall, is located 3rd from the top of the building shown. And here is the first building, McDonald Hall, right after it was built in 1912. Everything in one building, like a one-room schoolhouse. The classrooms were in the basement, the public space in the middle, and dorms were on the upper level. Here was this incredible frontier style building, classical porch, bricks for the building were made on site. Such a wonderful structure, building. So when we started master planning, some work had been done. A resource survey had been done, and so we had that to work with, and we were able to, again, this is that the consultant and tribe felt were eligible to the National Register, both individually eligible and contributing to a historic district. And the resources, I'll see if my cursor shows up, are significant core of historic buildings around an oval, the historic acequia, the ditch, and mission buildings coming down along the driveway to Apache Street. This is what it looked like then in 1997, a mix. You can see the historic core around the oval, but you can see the new wacky football field with a gym torqued with the football field. And you can see some other newer buildings along the edges. And here's an image of some early architecture in the back, significant, the main building, with 70s buildings in front, not significant. Even with this encroachment on campus that we saw, there still were remaining these foundation period buildings built from 1912 to 1929. You can see how those incredible buildings frame the mesa side of the oval, open space in front, the mission office off to the left, at the top of the road from Apache Street. As I said, through our research and planning, we defined this group of buildings and features as foundation period resources. So here we had, again, frontier planning, certainly institutional in a good way. The buildings have original hip dormers on hipped ends as four square details. There were practical, symbolic buildings designed and built by skilled folks who understood this type of influence, classical, some Beaux-Arts, some arts and crafts, even Jeffersonian type planning. Also remaining was the main building and additions to the foundation period buildings that were accomplished under this same later phase of work. We identified this work phase or period of significance as the transitional period, 1935 to 1940. Classical style, leading towards Georgian, arts and crafts touches, like that cedar siding you can see up under that gable roof form. Very modern roof form from the original hipped roofs. Also, a classical entry porch on that main building, and an interesting motif of pilasters on the walls of the main building, creating a vertical cadence through pilasters. The main building was built in 3 phases, the center first, and then side and side between 1935 and 1938. After looking at and analyzing both these periods of building development, we knew from a planning perspective that we had a lot of significant historic architecture that we had to work with. So the master planning phase took us about a year, and we did numerous programming and planning and design meetings with school staff, leadership, parents, students, Navajo Nation tribal reps. And we did what usually firms do when they plan, is presented options. And this is the option that the client chose for their campus. And it really was around this idea of saving the historic buildings, celebrating them, and then creating a circle of life walkway system around which new buildings and development could be anchored. And we did, most importantly, I think, and this is about designing for the future, designing buildings within a historic setting so that they are compatible. So we worked very hard on design guidelines. We based them on principles of academic use, sense of time, appropriate massing and form, architectural vocabulary, complementary material palettes that track the historic resources. And you can see this image just lists one category of our design guidelines, where we looked at style and relationship to historic buildings, i.e., what is the overall character, the significance, and then what are these features that we can replicate in new architecture to make the entire campus become unified. So here we're talking about massing and form, rhythm and proportion, porches, chimneys, dormers, forms of roof, gable versus hip, and again, materials. And so after this period of planning, we put together reports, very thick reports, and made a submittal to the Navajo Nation. And the Navajo Nation acted on all of these phases of work as the TIPO. We consulted directly with Navajo Nation, not the state. So with a submittal of this master plan, design guidelines, and EdSpec documents, we were approved by the nation to go forward with the first project, the phase 1 dorms. And we were able to demolish a non-significant residence hall and moved forward. But before we moved forward, as with Navajo and tribal culture, planning is important, and celebrating good planning is important. So the school had to design and build the ceremonial hogan that would center all of the work under the campus development program. And the staff and students went up into the Chusca Mountains. They got those logs, and our firm designed a concrete grade beam to put this hogan on. And we laugh to this day. That's probably the only permitted by City of Farmington hogan anywhere. So phase 1 project. We started the phase 1 project in 1999. It was funded by the Navajo Nation. 2 different funding packages, 2 different construction phases, shell and finish. And here is the plan. Again, on this historic campus, the dorm on the top is taking the position of the non-significant IKEA hall that we were allowed to demo. But just to the right of it is the historic laundry, a contributing resource to the district. And here's the plan, just so we have a sense. Here's 4 new dorms, 3 in a cluster off of the Circle of Life walkway, and the one at the top by the historic laundry. Clustering both at a site level and building level. And here's an image of the cluster at night. And here is an image of the dorm, settled nicely between historic features, the historic stone wall, the historic garage up on the hill behind. So history and the guidelines drove the design of this very first new building under the master plan and campus program. Adherence to the design guidelines drove the design, but other driving forces were green design, cultural design. The dorms are passively heated and cooled, but you can see historic references here in this building design. Big hipped roof on the end, the chimney as a significant feature, CMU at the base of the brick walls, similar to the stone base on McDonald Hall, and even the fins that you see that we use to move air passively vent the dorms, that came out of the character defining pilasters on the main building. And here's a shot of the main living room interior space. I think a snapshot of contemporary integrity through design, materials, workmanship. And here's an image. And it shows our use of the arts and crafts, cedar siding, shingle material from the historic buildings on these new buildings. So with this phase 1 project, again, that had been cleared by the nation, it set precedents for all design on this campus to adhere in the future to the design guidelines. And this was important because, frankly, we didn't know whether we were going to be the architect of record or not for future phases. We wanted to ensure integrity moving forward. So, phase 1 projects complete. Let me move my slide here. So, the school then came into a grant through the BIA, significant funding from the BIA to do the phase 2 project. So we had to interview for this, but because of our work on phase 1, the client hired us again. Planning and design for the phase 2 historic academic buildings and athletic center project began in 2004. We needed to, though, for this project, because of BIA funding, work very rigorously with the Navajo Nation and BIA on compliance. Here is the plan. Again, getting context, where are we in the master plan? Here are the 3 historic buildings, and you can see in the plan the new construction moving up on the rear, up to the mesa. And the plan for these buildings, the school wanted to save and restore the historic buildings, but create 21st century learning environments and add on new additions to the buildings. So what we had to do right away was a complete and rigorous study in integrity. First, here's McDonald Hall, 1912. The other 2 images show what happened to McDonald Hall during the transitional period. Additions were made to this structure, but the problem was that these new additions, while they were at the rear, which tends to work in relationship to rehab standards, it also wrapped around and obscured the facade of the building. And then the primary use of cedar siding all over this addition created a problem with integrity. We looked at this, we did drawings, consulted, and found that the transitional period addition lacked integrity due to many things, but primarily massing in form, location, and materials. And the nation agreed with us. We could remove this non-significant addition to create new additions in the new design. Here is Dodge Hall, 1925. It was originally built as they call it, the little boys' dorm. But what happened in 1935? Basically, they added on the new addition with the wall of the addition absolutely flush with the historic building's facade, and then used that cedar siding. They had a lower Alsatian roof form that didn't work. It obscured the chimney. We worked, planned, diagram described through report form, and the nation agreed with us that we could remove this transitional period addition too. So then we come to the middle building. Dodge and McDonald were simple. You took off the additions on the back. The buildings were left with great integrity of form, but Morgan Hall in the middle there in the upper left, historic image, 1929, it was originally a 2-story, not 3, hipped roof structure with dormers. And what did they do in 1935? The money came in, the main building was going to be built, and they wanted to spruce up this slightly diminutive building, I guess, and they chopped off the front of the building and put a new gable form perpendicular to the length of the original building, and then left the original building on the back end. And so we struggled on this one because in our minds, we wanted all of the foundation period buildings in that row to read, to be clear that this had been changed so radically, and the back of the building was frankly falling apart structurally, and the front transitional section faced the main building of the same period across the oval. So we said we need to save the front, the transitional period section. And again, the Navajo Nation agreed. So over and months of planning and design, and modeling and physical modeling, we came up with this overall plan, design plan. And what we decided to do was basically use 3 strategies. All the new additions would create a backdrop behind the historic buildings. You can see the historic buildings in yellow, what we left. And then we created a new 2-story linear circulation system that needed to connect 9 different levels of building floors. I mean, 9 levels we had to connect across 2- and 3-story buildings. So this linear system with bridges allowed us to do that, but it also did a very important thing. It created a conceptual, architectural gap between historic Mass and new Mass on the other side, a gap between historic and new. And with all of our planning, we had to deliver an enormous report to the nation during design development stage, so we could all agree on all of the removals, the design portee, the planned materiality, everything. So we submitted to the nation and then had to, because of the space of the design, we had to remove a contributing building, the historic garage you see in that image. So we had to do HABs on that for the removal. And let me move my cursor here. So here, voila, you see the design today. McDonald with a totally reconstructed historic porch, new metal roof, new replacement windows with a new classroom addition behind, connected by a bridge, open bridge to Morgan Hall. McDonald classroom block then, connecting to the Morgan higher classroom block with that bridge. And you can see on the side of the classroom block, the use of the cedar siding again that we got from the historic main building, and then a masonry base on the wall, relating again to the stone base on McDonald Hall. And here's an image of the bridge from Morgan connecting to the new Dodge classroom block. And you can see the restored Dodge Hall on the far right with the metal roof, new windows. Here's an image of that gap, that important gap between new and old. It's also a social space, and it's also a passive solar space. So there were many forces driving this architecture. And here is again, standing back at Morgan, looking at Dodge. Dodge also received a reconstructed porch. We did tons of research to reconstruct those porches and ended up using Trex instead of wood for all the balustrades. And it worked because it looked like the original, but it would last forever. And this is a final image. And this speaks to how hard Morgan Hall was. Remember, we had to tear off the historic back. And then we have these classroom blocks that we needed to pass behind the gable of Morgan. So what we ended up introducing was a new set of materials around an idea of a hub that provided a joint between the transitional Morgan Hall on the left and the brand new classroom block on the right. Calwall stucco, new materials for this evolving campus. And also in that phase, speaking of projects and planning, we did the athletic center project. On the left is the old gym. It wasn't historic, but it was very valuable. It was worth $1 million. So we saved the old gym, created a rotunda between it and the new gym, and created a space for those Navajo kids that love basketball. They wanted a gym better than the pit in Albuquerque to play their games, and they got it. And here is a view from Apache Drive. Again, here design guidelines drove this design. You can see pilasters. You can see the use of the stucco from Morgan, metal panel now on walls, coming down from metal panel on roofs. So I'm going to finish with then the phase 3 project, all new work. Again, the land had been cleared by the nation for archaeological, so we were often running on phase 3. 3 different parts, big project, big funding, again from the BIA, a new student center, a 5th dorm just above the acequia, and a new athletic center project. Student center project, excuse me. So here it is, the new student center. This was the BIA's first LEED Gold project. We designed for durability. We designed for integrity. And here you can see integrity in materiality, materials, workmanship, but even here, a sense of integrity of location, looking out across the campus from this big new space. And here is twirling around the building, seeing that consistent use of brick, akin to the historic buildings, brick, institutional, quality, masonry CMU base on the wall, like McDonald Hall with its stone base, pivoting around. Here's a view from the cluster of new dorms, and a view looking back down to the student center across the historic ditch with the athletic center in the background. We even did athletic fields and built a quality toilet to anchor the whole development for public use. Same materials though here, this is important. The same block, the same Calwall, the same metal, creating compatibility, consistency. So here is the campus in 2014 with all 3 phases of work. You can see that historic oval with the yellow circles, again anchoring the foundation period buildings on the upper side of the oval, transition period main building on the lower, with a circle of life walk, the dorms, the student center. And here it is from above, looking down from the top of the mesa across that incredible landscape with the San Juan River. These images then represent 100 years, I believe, of building with integrity from 1912 to 2020. I think of this project as a legacy for our firm and also for the school and for the nation. 100 years of building with integrity. And in closing, I guess, one of the most important points here is that I truly believe that design practice must focus on integrity so that as we design now, we have building stock in the future that we can find eligible, that we can value, that we can say is significant. Thank you. Questions?
Thank you, Lynette. If there's any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A or use the raise hand function. It looks like we have one question from Jonathan Craig. And his question is kind of multi-layered, so bear with me. Was the historic roofing material metal or wood shingle? If it was wood, what was the rationale for installing metal? Also, was the original soffit under the eaves enclosed? It looks like the eaves are closed off in the rehab.
Yeah. Jonathan, thank you. Good questions. On the historic buildings, the underside of the eaves was tongue and groove historic board. And we kept that. We did replacement, we rehabbed it. Now, the metal roof issue, it was huge. I mean, that's the one issue we went back and forth with Navajo Nation on, because they thought the metal was too much. But the historic buildings only had asphalt. It was soft, and it really, in a way, we determined didn't have the level of integrity and quality that we needed for a material that could be on every single building and last forever. So we immediately said it should be metal, but it should be pure, high quality galvalume. And we proposed that to the nation, and they balked. They balked for about 4 months. But in the end, the argument about the softness and lack of rigor of that asphalt shingle that had been on those buildings, I think, Jonathan, you're right. I think foundation, I haven't thought about this in a long time. Foundation was wood, but then when the money came in for a transitional period, they did all built up. shingle, so it was gone. So then we said, okay, there is a pattern of change in the roofing across periods of significance, and we're going to choose a new material to continue that trend that will last forever and can be used on every single building to create compatibility and a sense of unity.
Thank you. Lee Gamelski has a follow-up question to Jonathan Craig's question. And he just asked it, what was your argument for metal wall panels and also the use of pilasters as a building form?
Well, we never used the metal wall panel really on anything touching the historic buildings, whether they were the foundation period buildings or the new main building. So we had to again, across a $50 million building campaign, have a kit apart of materials that we could use in different ways across buildings. So we introduced it for new buildings. I think the first time we used it on the wall was at the Phase 2 Athletic Center. So it wasn't on the historic, and it was part of the total approved material palette we had to put past Navajo Nation. We had a historic report like that, and we had to list all the proposed materials that would be applied to historic and new. So that's how it worked.
Thank
I
you,
think
Lynette.
there was a second part I might have missed.
The use of
Please.
pilasters? The use of
pilasters. Yeah, the main building built 3 phases, 1935, 1938, had a very rigorous pilaster motif in the major exterior building walls. They had a concrete wall base and then pilasters in brick with setback brick. We thought that was useful. We thought that was very important. It was, as Stephen said, a vital detail, a character defining feature. So we, in the design guidelines, picked up on that and said, pilasters can be features that we use in new design. Will do what again? Create compatibility with the historic buildings and quality.
Thank you. I have a question from Adam Sullins related to landscapes. You mentioned a historic acequia and a stone wall. What other historic landscape features were preserved, and what challenges did you encounter with landscape preservation?
Well, I think in the resource survey, there may have been 4 features, but our work across time identified more. We always, from day one, were very cognizant of 3 major historic features. The acequia, contributing eligible, the historic cemetery, important, but Navajo don't want to really think about that, so we didn't celebrate that in a way. Everyone knew it was there, significant. there were these remnants of historic stone walls fronting the foundation period building, McDonald mostly, because it was about grading. There was also an area of historic lilacs, very significant area where there was incredible big area of tall lilacs, again in front of McDonald Hall. So we were in planning and design aware of multiple levels of landscape features. And then of course, the slope of the land. I mean, amazing the way the foundation buildings sit above the transitional across oval. But I must say frankly, that funding for projects, whether it was by the nation or the BIA that funded phase 2 and phase 3, what ends up happening? They don't fund landscape. So we weren't able to aggressively work on landscape, restoration, rehab. Our mode was to always protect it and promote development and restoration in the future. I would say though the acequia was always of incredible importance and is, and they maintain it, and it's vital. One time though, I mean, this speaks to what happens with resources. We had a huge storm. It was July, early, I think middle 2000, and water came from the mesa, huge rain event, filled the acequia, blew out the side of the acequia, and no kidding, the water ran down the hill into a brand new athletic center and ruined the brand new wood floor. And then the school was like, oh my God, the gym. And then it was also like, oh no, we have to restore the ditch. So, I mean, I in relationship to a question, I think the resources, landscape, cultural, are documented well. They're in the design guidelines. We've acted in protecting them. And it's really up to the school to raise money to bring them more clearly into view and restore them. We talked about the lilac grove every year of the 13 years we were up there. When can we bring them back, the lilacs?
Thank you, Lynette. It looks like there's no more questions unless someone has one they want to submit right now or wants to raise their hand. Otherwise, it looks like I'm going to turn it back over to Michelle for final remarks.
Yes, thank you, Carla. Thank you, everyone, for attending this workshop. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Again, if you have any questions that you think of later, please email me or Stephen Mostyn or Lynette Polari. And have a great rest of your day.
Bye. Be well.